Chapter 40 of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Dion Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 40. 6 days had passed since Karen's disappearance. The country had been searched. London still was being examined, and the papers were beginning to break into portraits of the missing girl. Karen became remote, non-existent, more than dead, it seemed, when her face, like that of some heroine of a newspaper novelette, gazed at one from the breakfast table. The first time that this happened, Madame von Marwitz, flinging the sheet from her, had burst into a violent storm of weeping. She sat on the afternoon of the 6th day in a sunny corner of the lower terrace and turned the leaves of a book with a listless hand. She was to be alone until dinner time. Tallie had gone into Helston by bus, and she had the air of one who feels solitude at once an oppression and a relief. She read little, raising her eyes to gaze unseeingly over the blue expanses stretched beneath her, or to look down as vaguely into the eyes of Victor, who lay at her feet. The restless spirit of the house had reached Victor. He lay with his head on his extended paws, in an attitude of quiescence, but his ears were pricked to watchfulness. His eyes, as he turned them now and again up to his mistress, were troubled. Aware of his glance, on one occasion, Madame von Marwitz stooped and caressed his head, murmuring, "Nous sommes des infortunes. Hein, mon chien." Her voice was profoundly sad. Victor understood her. Slightly thudding his tail, he gave a soft, responsive groan. And it was then, while she still leaned to him and still caressed his head, that shrill, emphatic voices struck on Madame von Marwitz's ear. The gravelled nook where she sat, her garden chair, and its adjusted cushions, set against a wall, was linked by ascending paths and terraces to the cliff path, and this again, though only through a way overgrown with gorse and bramble, to the public coastguard's path along the cliff top. The white stones that marked the way for the coastguards made a wide detour behind Madame von Marwitz's property, and this nearer egress to the cliff was guarded by a large placard warning off trespassers. Yet, looking in the direction of the voices, Madame von Marwitz, to her astonishment, saw that 3 ladies, braving the interdict, were actually marching down in single file upon her. 1 was elderly, and 2 were young. They wore travelling dress, and as she gazed at them in chill displeasure, the features of the first became dimly familiar to her. Where, she could not have said, yet she had seen that neat grey head before, that box-like hat with its depending veil, that firmly corseted matronly form, with its silver-set pouch, suggesting, typical of the travelling American lady as it was, a marsupial species. She did not know where she had seen this lady, but she was a travelling American. She accosted one in determined tones, and at some time in the past she had waylaid and inconvenienced her. Madame von Marwitz, as the 3 trooped down upon her, did not rise. She pointed to the lower terrace. "This is private property," she said, and her aspect might well have turned the unwary visitors, Acteon-like, into stags. "I must ask you to leave it at once. You see the small door in the garden wall below. It is unlocked, and it leads to the village. Good day to you." But, with a singularly bright and puckered look, the look of a surf-bather who measures with swift eye the height of the rolling breaker and plunges therein, the elderly lady addressed her with extraordinary volubility. "Baroness, you don't remember us, but we've met before. We have a mutual friend, Mrs. General Tolman of St. Paul's, Minnesota. Allow me to introduce myself again. Mrs. Slifer, Mrs. Hamilton K. Slifer, my girls Maud and Beatrice. We had the privilege of making your acquaintance over a year ago, Baroness, at the station in London, just before you sailed, and we had some talks on the steamer to that perfectly charming woman, Miss Scrotton. I hope she's well. We're over again this year, you see. We pine for dear old England and come just as often as we can. We feel we belong here more than over there sometimes, I'm afraid." Mrs. Slifer laughed swiftly and deprecatingly. "My girls are so often taken for English girls, the Burne-Jones type, you know. We've got friends staying at Mullion, so we thought we'd just drop down on Cornwall for a little tour after we landed at Southampton. And we drove over this afternoon and came down by the cliff. We are just crazy about your scenery, Baroness, and it's just the right setting for you. We've been saying so all day, to have a peek at the house we've heard so much about. And we don't want to disturb you, but it's the greatest possible pleasure, Baroness, to have this beautiful glimpse of you, with your splendid dog. How do you do, Victor? Why, I do believe he remembers me. We petted him so much at the station when your niece was holding him. We saw Mrs. Jardine the other day, Baroness. Such a pleasant surprise that was, too, only we're sorry to see she's so delicate. The New Forest will be just the place for her. We stayed there 3 days after landing, because my Beatrice here was very seasick, and I wanted her to have a little rest. We were simply crazy over it. I do hope Mrs. Jardine's getting better." All this had been delivered with such speed, such an air of decision and purpose, that Madame von Marwitz, who had risen in her bewildered indignation and stood, her book beneath her arm, her white cloak caught about her, had found no opportunity to check the torrent of speech, and as these last words came as swiftly and as casually as the rest, she could hardly for a moment collect her faculties. "My niece, Mrs. Jardine," she repeated, with a wild, wan utterance. "What do you say of her?" It was at this moment that Miss Beatrice began, in the background, to adjust her camera. She told her mother and sister afterwards that she seemed to feel it in her bones that something was doing. Mrs. Slifer, emerging from her breaker in triumph, struck out, blinking and smiling affably. "We heard all about the wedding in America," she said, "and we thought we might call upon her in London and see that splendid temple you'd given her. We heard all about that, too. I never saw a picture of him, but I knew her in a minute, naturally, though she did look so pulled down. Why, Baroness, what's the matter?" Madame von Marwitz had suddenly clutched Mrs. Slifer's arm with an almost appalling violence of mien and gesture. "What is the matter?" Madame von Marwitz repeated, shaking Mrs. Slifer's arm. "Do you know what you are saying? My niece has been lost for a week. The whole country is searching for her. Where have you seen her? When was it? Answer me at once." "Why, Baroness, by all means, but you needn't shake my head off," said Mrs. Slifer, not without dignity, raising her free hand to straighten her hat. "We've never heard a word about it. Why, this is perfectly providential, Baroness. I must ask you not to go on shaking me like that. I've got a very delicate stomach, and the least thing upsets my digestion." "Juste cieux!" Madame von Marwitz cried, dropping Mrs. Slifer's arm and raising her hands to her head, while in the background Miss Beatrice's kodak gave a click. "Will the woman drive me mad? Karen, my child, where is she?" "Why, we saw her at the station at Brockenhurst, in the New Forest, didn't we, Maud?" said Miss Slifer. "And it must have been, now let me see." Poor Mrs. Slifer collected her wits, a bent forefinger at her lips. "Today's Thursday, and we got to Mullion yesterday, and we stopped at Winchester for a day and night on our way to the New Forest. It was on Saturday last, of course. We'd been having a drive about that part of the forest, and we were taking the train, and they had just come, and we saw them on the opposite platform. He was just helping her out of the train, and we didn't have any time to go round and speak to them." "They!" Madame von Marwitz nearly shouted. "She was with a man? Last Saturday? Who was it? Describe him to me. Was he slender, with fair hair, dark eyes, the air of a poet?" she panted. And her aspect was so singular that Miss Beatrice, startled out of her professional readiness, fail to snap it." "Why no," said Mrs. Slifer, keeping her clue. "I shouldn't say a poetical-looking man, should you, Maud? A fleshy man, very big and fleshy, and he was taking such good care of her and looked so kind of tender and worried that I concluded he was her husband. She looked like a very sick woman, Baroness." "Fleshy," Madame von Marwitz repeated, and the word in her moan was almost graceful. "Fleshy, you say? An old man? A stout old man?" She held her hands distractedly pressed to her head. "What stout old man does Karen know? Is it a stranger she has met?" "No, he wasn't old. This was a young man, Baroness. He had, now let me see, his hair was sort of red. I remember noticing his hair. And he wore knee pants and a soft hat with a feather in it, and was very highly coloured." "Bon Dieu!" Madame von Marwitz gasped. She had again, while Mrs. Slifer spoke, seized her by the arm as though afraid that she might escape her, and she now gazed with a fixed gaze above Mrs. Slifer's head and through the absorbed Maud and Beatrice. Red hair? A large young man? Was he clean shaven? Did he wear eyeglasses? Had he the face of a musician? Did he look like an Englishman? An English gentleman? Mrs. Slifer, nodding earnest assent to the first questions, shook her head at the latter. "No, he didn't. What I said to Maud and Beatrice was that Mr. Jardine looked more German than English. He looked just like a German student, Baroness." "Franz Lippheim!" cried Madame von Marwitz. She sank back upon the seat from which she had risen, putting a hand before her eyes. Victor, at her knees, laid a paw upon her lap and whined an interrogative sympathy. The three American ladies gathered near and gazed in silence upon the great woman, and Beatrice, carefully adjusting her camera, again took a snap. The picture of Madame von Marwitz, with her hand before her eyes, her anxious dog at her knees, found its way into the American press, and illustrated touchingly the story of the lost adopted child. Madame von Marwitz was not sorry when, among a batch of press cuttings, she came across the photograph and saw that her most genuine emotion had been thus made public. She looked up at last, and the dizziness of untried and perilous freedom was in her eyes. But curious now of other objects they took in, weighed and measured the little group before her. Power grew in them, an upwelling of force and strategy. She smiled upon the Slifers, and she rose. "You have done me an immeasurable service," she said, and as she spoke she took Mrs. Slifer's hand with a noble dignity. "You have lifted me from despair. It is blessed news that you bring. My child is safe with a good, a talented man, one for whom I have the deepest affection, and in the New Forest at Brockenhurst on Saturday. Ah, I shall soon have her in my arms." Still holding Mrs. Slifer's hand, she led them up the terraces and towards the house. "The poor child is ill, distraught. She had parted from her husband, fled from him. Ah, it has been a miserable affair, that marriage. But now all will be well. Bon Dieu! What joy, what peace of heart you have brought me. I shall be with her to-morrow. I start at once. And you, my good friends, let me hear your plans. Let me be of service to you. Come with me for the last stage of your journey. I will not part with you willingly." "It's all simply too wonderful, Baroness," Mrs. Slifer gasped, as she skipped along on her short legs beside the goddess-like stride of the great woman, who held her very tightly. "We were just going to drift along up to Tintagel and then work up to London, taking in all the cathedrals we could on our way." "And you will change your route in order to give me the pleasure of your company. You will forfeit Tintagel, is it not so?" Madame von Marwitz smiled divinely. "You will come with me in my car to Truro, where we take the train, and I will drop you to-night at the feet of a cathedral. So, your luggage is at Mullion? That is simple. We wire to your friends to pack and send it on at once. Leave it to me. You are in my hands. It is a kindness that you will do me. I need you, Mrs. Slifer." She pressed the lady's arm. "My old friend, who lives with me, has left me for the day, and moreover she is too old to travel. I must not be alone. I need you. It is a kindness that you will do me. Now you will wait for me here, and tea will be brought to you. I shall keep you waiting but for a few moments." It was to be lifted on the back of a genie. She had wafted them up, along the garden paths, across the verandah, into the serenity and spaciousness and dim whites and greens and silvers of the great music room, with a backward gaze that had, in all its sweetness, something of hypnotic force and fixity. She left them with the sergeant portrait looking down at them, and the room in its strangeness and beauty seemed part of the spell she laid upon them. The Slifers, herded together in the middle of it, gazed about them half awestruck, and spoke almost in whispers. "Why, girls," said Mrs. Slifer, who was the first to find words, "this is the most thrilling thing I ever came across." "You've pulled it off this time, mother, and no mistake," said Maud, glancing somewhat furtively up at the sergeant. "Do look at that perfectly lovely dress she has on in that picture. Did you ever see such pearls? And the eyes seem to follow you, don't they?" "The poor distracted thing just clings to us," said Mrs. Slifer. "I shouldn't wonder if she was as lonely as could be." All the same, Beatrice, the doubting Thomas of the group, now commented. "I don't think however excited she was, she ought to have shaken you like that, mother." Beatrice had examined the appurtenances of the great room with a touch of nonchalance. It was she whom Gregory had seen at the station, seated on the pile of luggage. "That's petty of you, Bee," said Mrs. Slifer gravely. "Real small and petty. It's a great soul at white heat we've been looking at." Handcock at this point brought in tea, and after she had placed the tray and disposed the plates of cake and bread and butter and left the Slifers alone again, Mrs. Slifer went on under her breath, seating herself to pour out the tea. "And do look at this teapot, girls. Isn't it too cute for words? My, what will the Joneses say when they hear about this? They'd give their eye teeth to be with us now." The Slifers, indeed, were never to forget their adventure. It was to be impressed upon their minds, not only by its supreme enviableness, but by its supreme discomfort. It was almost 5 when, like 3 Ganymedes uplifted by the talons of a fierce, bright bird, they soared with Madame von Marwitz towards Truro, and at Truro, in spite of a reckless speed which desperately dishevelled their hair and hats, they arrived too late to catch the 6:40 train for Exeter. Madame von Marwitz strode majestically along the platform, her white cloak trailing in the dust, called for station masters, demanded special trains, fixed haughty, uncomprehending eyes upon the officials, who informed her that she could not possibly get a train until 10, resigned herself, with sundry exclamations of indignation and stamps of the foot, to the tedious wait, sailed into the refreshment room only to sail out again, mounted the car not yet dismissed, bore the Slifers to a hotel, where they had a dinner over which she murmured at intervals, "Bon Dieu, est-ce donc possible?" and then, in the chill dark evening, toured about in the adjacent country until 10, when Burton was sent back to Les Solitudes, and when they all got into the train for Exeter. She had never in all her life travelled alone before. She hardly knew how to procure her ticket, and her helplessness in regard to box and dressing case was so apparent that Mrs. Slifer saw to the one and Maud carried the other, together with the fur-lined coat when this was thrown aside. The hours that they passed with her in the train were the strangest that the Slifers had ever passed. They were chilled, they were sleepy, they were utterly exhausted, but they kept their eyes fixed on the perplexing, resplendent object that upbore them. Beatrice, it is true, showed by degrees a slight sulkiness. She had not liked it when, at Truro, Madame von Marwitz had supervised their wires to the Joneses, and she liked it less when Madame von Marwitz explained to them in the train that she relied upon them not to let the Joneses, or anybody for the present, know anything about Mrs. Jardine. Something in Madame von Marwitz's low-toned and richly murmured confidences, as she told Maud and Mrs. Slifer that it was important for Mrs. Jardine's peace of mind, and for her very sanity, that her dreaded husband should not hear of her whereabouts, made Beatrice, as she expressed it to herself, tired. She looked out of the window while her mother and sister murmured, "Why, certainly, Baroness. Why, yes, we perfectly understand," leaning forward in the illuminated carriage like docile conspirators. After this Madame von Marwitz said that she would try to sleep, but propped in her corner she complained so piteously of discomfort that Mrs. Slifer and Maud finally divested themselves of their jackets and contrived a pillow for her out of them. They assured her that they were not cold, and Madame von Marwitz, reclining now at full length, murmured "Mille remerciements." Soon she fell asleep, and Mrs. Slifer and Maud, very cold and very unresentful, sat and watched her slumbers. From time to time she softly snored. She was very comfortable in her fur-lined cloak. It was 1 o'clock when they reached Exeter, and drove, dazed and numbed, to a hotel. Here Madame von Marwitz further availed herself of the services of Maud and Mrs. Slifer, for she was incapable of unpacking her box and dressing-case. Mrs. Slifer maided her, while Maud, with difficulty at the late hour, procured her hot water, bouillon, and toast. Beatrice, meanwhile, callously avowing her unworthiness, said that she was dead tired, and went to bed. Madame von Marwitz bade Mrs. Slifer and Maud the kindest good night, smiling dimly at them over her bedroom candlestick as she ushered them to the door. "So," she said, "I leave you to your cathedral." When the Slifers arose next day, late, for they were very weary, they found that Madame von Marwitz had departed by an early train. Meanwhile, at Les Solitudes, old Mrs. Talcott turned from side to side all night, sleepless. Her heart was heavy with anxiety. Karen was found, and to-morrow Mercedes would be with her. She had sent for Mercedes, so the note pinned to Mrs. Talcott's dressing-table had informed her, and Mercedes would write. What had happened? Who were the unknown ladies who had appeared from no one knew where, during her absence at Helston, and departed with Mercedes for Truro? "Something's wrong. Something's wrong," Mrs. Talcott muttered to herself during the long hours. "I don't believe she sent for Mercedes, not unless she's gone crazy." At dawn she fell at last into an uneasy sleep. She dreamed that she and Mercedes were walking in the streets of Cracow, and Mercedes was a little child. She jumped beside Mrs. Talcott, holding her by the hand. The scene was innocent, yet the presage of disaster filled it with a strange horror. Mrs. Talcott woke bathed in sweat. "I'll get an answer to my telegram this morning," she said to herself. She had telegraphed to Gregory last night, at once. Karen is found. Mercedes has gone to her. That's all I know yet. She clung to the thought of Gregory's answer. Perhaps he, too, had news. But she had no answer to her telegram. The post, instead, brought her a letter from Gregory that had been written the morning before. "Dear Mrs. Talcott," it ran, "Karen is found. The detectives discovered that Mr. Franz Lippheim had not gone to Germany with his family. They traced him to an inn in the New Forest. Karen is with him, and has taken his name. May I ask you, if possible, to keep this fact from her guardian for the present? Yours sincerely, Gregory Jardine." When Mrs. Talcott had read this she felt herself overcome by a sudden sickness and trembling. She had not yet well recovered from her illness of the spring. She crept upstairs to her room and went to bed. Chapter 40.